Welcome to episode 257 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my award-winning books, blog, and podcast case reviews with former colleagues. In this episode, we get to speak to Special Agent Cerena Coughlin, an FBI Applicant Coordinator and recruiter for the Philadelphia Division, and Special Agent Cassandra Winkel, a Philadelphia First Office agent and recent Quantico graduate. They take us through all phases of the FBI Special Agent hiring process and the training program at the FBI Academy. This is part one of a two-part recruitment episode, so make sure you also check out part two, where Special Agents Coughlin and Winkle provide detailed answers to listener questions. During this interview, they cover more than 20 topics. To make it easier for you to review each area covered, I've listed in the show notes on my website, FBIjobs.gov, audio timestamps. There's a link for the show notes in your podcast app's description of this episode. Special Agent Cerena Coughlin has been with the FBI for 21 years. She was a member of the Los Angeles Innocent Images SAFE team, where she investigated cases involving the sexual exploitation of children. She was later assigned to counterterrorism squads in the Los Angeles and Baltimore divisions. In the Philadelphia division, before being assigned as the FBI recruiter, she was on a cybercrime squad. Special Agent Cassandra Winkel began her career with the FBI in 2017 as a Staff Operations Specialist, SOS, working counterterrorism matters at FBI headquarters. In April 2021, she received an appointment to begin training as a special agent at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Special Agent Winkle is currently working on a counterterrorism squad in the Philadelphia division. If you're listening to these recruitment episodes because you're interested in joining the FBI, I wish you much success on your FBI journey. If you're listening just because you want to learn more about the Bureau, I want to thank you for your support of the FBI. This special update recruitment episode is so packed with new information about the FBI hiring and training programs that even active and retired FBI employees are going to learn a lot. I know I did. I want to thank everyone for their support. Now here's the show. Wait a minute, I forgot to do something. I want to give a shout out to Arcadius Dabrowski. Your friends at the Philadelphia Division tell me that you're a loyal listener of FBI Retired Case File Review. Thanks, Arcadius. Now, here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, our favorite applicant coordinator from the Philadelphia Division, Special Agent Cerena Coughlin, and new agent, Special Agent Cassandra Winkel. Hi, Cerena. Hi, Cassie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is pretty cool. People have been waiting for this recruitment episode. I've been talking about it for the last couple of months. I do want everyone to know that the reason it took us so long to finally get together is that you knew of some changes that were going to be occurring in the hiring and training program. And so we wanted to wait until we had those. We'll talk about those as we go through all the process. But what are the areas that these updates have occurred?
So the main changes that we've had in just the last couple of months include the physical fitness test and where it comes in the process. There has been some major changes to our drug usage policy. And there have also been some shifts at Quantico, including the length of time that a new agent trainee would be spending at Quantico and the curriculum.
All right. So when we get to those changes, please remind us what it was and what it is now. And before we move on, I have to say thank you to your SAC, special agent in charge Jackie McGuire for allowing you to be here today, because it's always best to hear directly from somebody currently involved in the program. So thank you again, SAC McGuire. All right. I guess we should start as if a person is interested in the FBI. Where do they learn information about how to actually apply?
So we have an excellent resource, which you can't always say about a government website. FBIjobs.gov contains all of the information you would need to apply, as well as to determine what career path you're interested in. Way too many people think that the only opportunity that the FBI has to offer is the special agent position. Your listeners have heard me say before, there are more than 800 different job roles and titles in the FBI. So visiting that website is the best place to start your research and your journey.
I know that we've done other recruiting episodes before, but let's just talk about everything. Make this a one-stop shopping experience, and let's just refresh everything. When we're talking about the special agent position, who's qualified?
That is also something that a lot of people have misconceptions. We don't look for law enforcement skills. Way too many people think I need to have a law enforcement or a military background to qualify to be a special agent. And we are looking for people that instead have these certain characteristics and traits and qualities that we refer to as the core competencies. So we're looking for people between the ages of 23 and 37. However, the average age to report to Quantico for new agent training has been the same for decades at this point. It's 31. So it varies somewhere between 30 and 32. That really surprises people until they get involved in the process and they realize that you need to have a lot of life experience to draw from to successfully get through the process, as well as to graduate from Quantico with credentials in hand, realizing that your first day on duty as a special agent, you could have the exact same responsibilities as someone that has 20 years on the job. That means that we need to hire people with maturity and that have a lot of experience in those core areas. It's things like leadership, flexibility and adaptability, strong communication skills, the ability to collaborate and work well on a team. I tell people all the time, my favorite group to recruit from is teachers. If you look at those core competencies and you look at the characteristics and traits that make a fantastic FBI agent, they're the exact ones that are constantly on display every day in classrooms all across the country.
That's going to shock a lot of people, because in the public's mind, and you mentioned this, when they think of somebody who's coming into the FBI, they're thinking about somebody who's got law enforcement or military experience.
We teach you that at Quantico. Quantico is all about learning the law enforcement skills, but we can't teach you how to be that person that's going to thrive in the FBI environment, specifically in the special agent role. And that's when it comes down to those more soft skills, those competencies.
We're going to get a better idea of a makeup of an FBI new agent class when we talk to Cassie. I'm hoping that she'll give us an example of who was in her class, but talk about the people that you're getting applications from.
It runs the gambit. I have right now an applicant who will be reporting to Quantico in a little over a week that was a Catholic priest. I have a sports psychologist that we hope to send to Quantico in a couple of months. I have lots of mechanical engineers. I do have several police officers and people with military backgrounds, but I also have those school teachers. I have a lot of people from the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. So along with fitting those parameters that I mentioned, you must have a minimum of 2 years professional work experience with an undergraduate degree and 1 year with a graduate degree. We define professional work experience as a position that required a degree for you to hold that position, or that you have risen to a particular level of responsibility and authority. That's the reason why we will often see people successfully going through the process a little later than most would expect, because you really do have to draw from all elements of your life, but we are looking for depth of professional work experience.
I've asked all the questions that I can think of right now to set everything up. I'm going to go ahead and let you go through your recruiting presentation. If you could take us from the beginning of the recruiting phase to the very end when a person gets their letter and they're walking into Quantico, where do you want to start?
I'll start right at the beginning where I recommend most people to begin, which is that visit to FBIjobs.gov and to identify your local recruiter. So when you go to that website, you will see a button that says find your recruiter. Even though the website is already an excellent resource, we are actually going through a revamp of it to make it more easily readable and accessible on mobile devices, since that's what most people are using now. From the mock-ups that I've seen, that find a recruiter button is going to be even easier to find. So you click on that, it will take you to a list of all 56 field offices. You can determine which one is closest to you. As I've told Jerry multiple times, I'm always happy to answer questions from people all over the United States, even outside of the US. So pretty much any recruiter that you reach out to would be able to answer questions, but it's always great to develop a relationship with someone that will then be your point of contact as you make your way through the process. Try to find your local recruiter. After that, once you are ready to go, you will also use FBIjobs.gov to submit your application. You'll want to use a federal resume template to prepare your resume. That resume is viewed along with all of the documentation that is part of your application by a unit at headquarters. And they scrub through that information to determine if you meet the minimum qualifications to become a special agent, which are some of those things that we've just been discussing. It is not possible to be overqualified for the special agent position. We're just looking to ensure that you meet the minimum qualifications to continue on through the process. If you are able to make it through that resume scrub, then you are asked to schedule yourself for a phase 1 test. That phase 1 test is taken at testing centers, which are available all across the country. It's a logic-based reasoning, critical thinking skills test. We have a practice version available at FBIjobs.gov, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that test before you sit down for the actual exam, so you have an idea of what it is that we're going to be looking for. Once you have successfully passed phase 1, and you have 2 opportunities in a lifetime to sit down for that test and pass it. It's a pretty big deal when you're sitting for that test, since you only have 2 shots to be successful. Once you've passed that, you are scheduled for your meet and greet. We have had some changes during COVID, including a new applicant portal. Our applicants are now able to schedule themselves for various events via the portal instead of just through the field office and the applicant coordinator. So applicants now go onto that portal to schedule themselves for their meet and greet. Some offices are holding those events virtually. Some of them are having them in person. So it's going to vary according to your field office. Here in Philadelphia, we've been doing a lot of virtual meet and greets. The meet and greet is broken down into 2 steps. You have a general information session where you get a lot more information about the remaining steps of the process, as well as the FBI in general. And then you have a one-on-one session that you sit down with an agent. They go through your resume, they go through your application, and they talk to you about the core competencies, how to prepare well for the next phases. And you just get a better sense of who the candidate is and whether they should go on to the next step at this time or at a later time.
Who's the agent that is doing this kind of pre-interview at the meet and greet?
It's going to vary by field office. A lot of field offices use phase 2 assessors, which are the agents that conduct the actual interview during phase 2. I have been doing all of my one-on-one sessions for the last few months, and it's been an amazing opportunity because I'm getting to know my applicants very well right from the outset. It's definitely a heavier lift, but it's, I think, been very beneficial for me, and certainly has given the applicants a more personalized approach. And I know that there are a handful of field offices doing that as well. But for some field offices, we try to get more senior agents, people that have had a little more time in place, but it could be just about any agent that's available to assist with that.
And how important is this? Should you look at it like speed dating where you have a quick chance to get to know each other? Or is it more serious that your chances of moving on to the next phase takes place at that meet and greet, at that one-on-one conversation?
It is a very important part of the process. The field is able to make a recommendation whether somebody is going to move on to the next step or not. The final decision is made by headquarters, but a lot of what's going on during that meet and greet is information gathering. So that agent is putting together a package that then goes on to headquarters, that it helps headquarters make that final determination of whether somebody will be going on to the next step or not. And what I tell my applicants at the general information session is I usually have 3 types of people that come to the meet and greet stage. I have people that are not going to be special agents, but they might be a great fit for another position. It could be that they just don't have the right feel for a law enforcement position, but they still are very invested in the FBI's mission of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. So a lot of times during the one-on-one session, I will have those candidates self-identify, and that gives me an opportunity to talk to them about different opportunities and roles that they could apply for. The second category, those are people that would be a great special agent, but we don't want to send them to phase 2 too early. Often these are people that lack a lot of life experience. They might lack maturity. These tend to be our youngest candidates. I will often have conversations with those candidates and let them know, I think you will be a great fit for the FBI someday, but I don't know if it's going to happen for you right now. Please continue to be interested in the position and work with me as you wait to go into the meet and greet again. And there's a 1-year span from the time that you are told that you're not going on to the next step before you can come back into the meet and greet stage.
Is 1 year long enough? If you're telling somebody that you don't think they should move on because they don't have enough experience, is 1 year really enough time for them to gain that experience?
Sometimes it is, because they become much more familiar with what it is that we're looking for. A lot of times people enter into this process with all of those misconceptions that the general public has based on popular media portrayals of being a special agent, as opposed to the reality of what we're looking for and what we require. And I tell candidates all the time, once they've gone through the meet and greet once, they will now start to look at the world in a completely different way, because everything will become an opportunity for them to develop in those core competency areas. I have had candidates that came back after a year and they were much better prepared because they are looking at things differently.
This is another area where there have been changes. I know it probably occurred maybe a year to 2 years ago, but the amount of work experience that is required, that's changed in the last couple of years too, didn't it?
I believe it changed in 2018. So it's a fairly recent change. It used to be 3 years and 2 years, and now it's 2-year requirement and 1 year. What's interesting is we have had additional applicants, but that average to report to Quantico, average age remains 31, which tells us that we're getting more people interested in the position at an earlier stage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are successful at going through phase 2, which, Jerry, to your point, is another reason why that meet and greet portion of the process is so critical, because we don't want somebody to go to phase 2 too early, because just like phase 1, you only have 2 lifetime opportunities to go to phase 2 and to pass that portion of the process. That third category of folks at the meet and greet, those are the people that we determine, yes, we think the likelihood of success for you at phase 2 is very high. You have met all of the qualifications that we're looking for. You've shown us a high degree of professionalism. Your communication skills are what are needed. And we think that you're ready to go to phase 2.
Do you tell them that there, or they get some type of letter or communication?
So everything is determined by headquarters officially. And so the communication will come to them through headquarters. But that's the great thing about being able to do the one-on-ones myself is I've really been able to go more in depth with my applicants and talk to them about, based on my experience, what I think they should be looking toward next, whether it's let's spend another year working together, preparing you to come back into the meet and greet, or let's talk a little more in depth about phase 2, because I suspect that headquarters is going to be recommending that you go on to phase 2.
Well, this is very interesting because I get lots and lots of questions from people who are listening to FBI Retired Case File Review about the process. I forward many of them to you. One of the questions I always get is, how do I know when I'm ready to apply? They might have just graduated from college, but they've been working full time while they were in school, and they just don't know if they're ready. They don't know if they're competitive.
And that's where developing the relationship with your recruiter is so important. I have both the recruiter and applicant coordinator role in Philadelphia. There are many field offices that those positions are held by multiple people. And then in some, it's the same as we are in Philadelphia. It gives me a nice perspective because I'm able to look at things not only from the recruitment standpoint, but also looking at it as the person who's helping these individuals to get all the way through the process. And in every field office, recruiters and applicant coordinators, if that's held by multiple people, they work side by side very closely, trying to make this process for the applicant as smooth as possible and to ensure that the people that are continuing on at each different step should be at that time so that we're not taking away one of those precious opportunities that they do have only 2 of. I've found that developing that relationship with your recruiter makes a tremendous difference in helping somebody know, am I ready at this point?
I think probably that's the number one question that I get. Is this my time? Should I apply now? And that's when I send it on to you.
I love those emails. It lets me know how many people were reaching with this podcast.
That's a good feeling for me too. So we're past the meet and greet. What's next?
As of March 24th, we have changed things a little bit. So now you take a physical fitness test right after the meet and greet. We encourage our candidates to take that within 30 days after the meet and greet. So this is a brand new policy change. For the last about 2 years, you didn't have to take the physical fitness test until all the way at the end of the process. And that was the only time you had to take it. So now we are encouraging people to take it right after the meet and greet within those 30 days. And we have also changed up what is required for them to continue on to the next step, which would be phase 2 in terms of that physical fitness test. A passing score for the PFT remains a 12 with at least 1 point in each category. And I will tell you what the categories are in a moment. We now have a minimum baseline score that people are required to achieve to go on to phase 2. That minimum baseline score is at least a 9, and you must get a minimum of 1 point in 3 out of the 4 categories with no negative score. So the 4 categories are 1-minute timed sit-ups, a 300-meter sprint, push-ups according to our protocol, which is very strict, and a 1.5-mile run. So the individual events scoring structure, that hasn't changed. A passing score hasn't changed. However, to go on to the next step, you must achieve at least that minimum baseline score of a 9.
Wow. That's pretty serious. I'm sure there are people who were listening who were thinking they wanted to apply for the agent position who aren't working out and who are thinking, I'll find out if I pass before I start getting ready. And now they got to be ready from the get-go.
Exactly. The only way to teach yourself, teach your body how to pass this test is to take the test. I have far too many candidates that walk out onto that field and they are obviously in amazing shape. They look like they lived at the gym. I've had collegiate level athletes come out and not pass that physical fitness test because they haven't taken the test in its entirety and they haven't taken it often enough that their body realizes if I give maximum effort on those first 3 events with only a 5-minute rest in between, I still have a 1.5 mile run at the end. It is designed in that order for a reason. That 1.5 mile run, it doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in. It's going to kick everybody's butt. It is not going to be easy because your body's already exhausted. And the only way to trick it into going around that track 6 times is by doing it regularly. So we usually recommend at least once a week.
It really helps to get candidates who are serious about their physical fitness.
Absolutely. And for so many people, because we're not just recruiting from the law enforcement and military backgrounds, for a lot of people, physical fitness and physical preparedness isn't a part of their lifestyle. It isn't something that they've had to do to have their job. And if you want to be a special agent, guess what? This is now a part of your job, maintaining a certain level of physical fitness. And I can totally understand why somebody might look at this change and be intimidated and think, oh no, well, I shouldn't apply now. This is another major change. We used to have a 3 lifetime maximum attempt for the physical fitness test. You were only able to go out and take the test 3 times. That is no longer the case. Once you have taken that test, the first time, if you're not able to achieve that minimum baseline score, you have a full year to come out multiple times until you're able to get that minimum score. We're not even telling you that you have to get the passing score within that year. You just need to get that 9 with at least 1 in 3 of the 4 categories. That means, and I hate to say this, but you can actually get a 0 in one of those 4 events and still move on. We are encouraging candidates to do that at least once every 60 days until they're able to achieve that minimum baseline score. They can come out every time I have a physical fitness test, as long as I have an opening for it. And most applicant coordinators at this point are running PFTs at least once a month, if not multiple times a month. So it's very much like you said, Jerry, it's all about how much they want this job. The test is designed for anyone that puts in the effort to be able to pass it. You don't have to be Captain America to pass this test.
What is the physical fitness requirement once you become an agent? I know throughout the years, we've had the physical fitness test, the mandatory test as an agent that you had to take, and then there were years that you didn't. So what's going on now?
You have to take it. You have to take it on an annual basis. You are also paid by the FBI to work out. So we are given hours every week that are dedicated to gym time. So there really isn't any excuse once you're on board. The great news is once you're on board, when you take the physical fitness test, they do take age into consideration, which now that I have 21 years in the FBI, I'm very appreciative of, but it is still a part of your job. You must take and pass that test annually.
I'm going to ask Cassie a question here about the physical fitness testing. Before you became an agent, how difficult was that for you? And do you have any suggestions or recommendations for people as they try to get themselves into good shape to be successful in passing that test?
So I was not an athlete in high school. I was not an athlete in college. So if you think you have to be, a college level athlete to train to pass the test, that's absolutely not the case. I started doing CrossFit when I was about 26, and that was kind of the foundation for my fitness. And then when I decided quite a few years later that I was going to go for this agent position, my training kind of changed just to really, like Cerena said, to focus on the actual events themselves. CrossFit's a great foundation for how to learn how to work out if you've never done that before, but it really is body weight exercises, squats, a lot of core exercises, lots of running, which unless I'm being chased, I don't really enjoy running, but I did a lot of running, a lot of sprints, and then just weightlifting. There's resources in the field offices that can give you training programs. There's also great resources on FBI Jobs in a packet that kind of explains how to structure your training throughout the week. And then just obviously general kind of lifestyle changes of changing your diet, eating correctly, getting lots of rest. That's kind of what helped me be successful. definitely having access to a track is very helpful because that's how you have to take the test, is on a quarter-mile track. Usually local high schools on the weekends especially will, offer kind of an open track schedule that you can go out and train. My own personal experience with the fit test was kind of up and down. I passed it in the beginning and then I had some issues passing it right before I went to Quantico, but was able to train. And that was just some work related stuff. I wasn't able to train at the level that I needed to before I was able to get to Quantico. But definitely it's a lifestyle change. If you're currently not working out, it is consistency and really just kind of changing your outlook. And for me, it was, I want this job and I will work and do whatever I have to do fitness wise to get there.
Excellent. Thank you. And Cerena, for me, I was always a big runner. Unfortunately, my knees won't allow me to run, and now I have to be a big walker. But I've always had earbuds, my music playing. Is that allowed when you're taking the test? And is it allowed also at Quantico?
No, and I'm really glad that you asked me that. It is not allowed at Quantico, and therefore it's not allowed when you take the test in the field. We have to replicate as closely as we can in the field what the test would be like once you're going through basic training. And you are not allowed to have earbuds. And unfortunately, for those of us in the Northeast where it gets very cold in the wintertime, you can't wear gloves, you can't wear earmuffs, you can't wear a hat while you're actually going through the events. We allow you to wear them in between in that 5-minute rest period, but we don't do it at Quantico, therefore we don't do it in the field.
Wow. I'm glad I asked the question too, because that would make a big difference for me.
Me too.
Yeah, because when I was running, I used the music to help me with my pacing when I wanted to run a little faster. All right, what's next?
So once you have achieved at least that minimum baseline score, then you are invited to schedule yourself for phase 2. And phase 2, I tell people that's where the rubber meets the road. It is, in my opinion, the most difficult portion of the process. That is the interview. And then there's also a written test. So phase 2 is broken into 2 parts. You have a written examination that you take at a testing center, just like you took phase 1. You schedule yourself for that. It's just like writing a term paper. We provide you a scenario, facts related to that scenario, and then ask you to provide us a well-written, cohesive product that you draw a conclusion or make an argument. There's a practice version at FBI Jobs. Highly recommend that everybody checks that out, particularly if it's been a while since they've been in school. They haven't written a term paper anytime soon. Phase 2 is all about communication skills, which is critically important to a special agent. At the end of the day, what an agent does is talk to people. And it's typically on one of the worst days of that person's life, whether they are a victim, a witness, a subject. Then once we have had those conversations, we need to go back to the office and document it. So communication skills, both written and verbal, very, very important to the special agent role. Once you have completed that written test, you are able to schedule yourself for the oral interview. The 2 are weighed together. You do not pass the written test to go on to the oral interview. In fact, sometimes the written test isn't even scored until after the oral interview is completed, but you do need to have that written completed before you're able to schedule yourself for the oral interview. The vast majority of FBI offices have gone back to the regional model for the interview, which means you would not be going into your processing office to be interviewed. Instead, the FBI will pay for your travel to go to a regional location. In Philadelphia, for example, we typically send people to the New York field office. Sometimes Baltimore will host for us, and Boston has recently become a new regional location. The oral interview is very unique. I don't know of another organization that has a system quite like ours. There are multiple things that set it apart, especially within the law enforcement community. First, we use life experience-based questions, and a lot of law enforcement agencies use hypothetical. What would you do in a particular situation? For the FBI, because we're looking for this wealth of subject matter expertise, we're not just looking for this very narrow path to come into the special agent ranks. Instead, we're looking for those core competencies. The only way that we're able to gauge whether someone really has strength in those areas is to look at what they've already accomplished. So the questions that you will be asked will be life experience based, and the majority will be related to those core competencies. It is a 1-hour interview. You have 13 questions. It is a very structured interview. So the questions you are asked, the agents read those questions. They are not able to interpret. They are not able to rephrase those questions. They can repeat them, but you're not going to be getting the usual conversational give and take during this interview. Even follow-up questions are scripted. So it's very structured, and that throws a lot of people off. That sets it apart. But the most unusual thing about the phase 2 interview is the fact that the 3 agents asking you those questions will know nothing about you. They will have your name and your social security number. And other than that, you're a blank slate. And you have 1 hour and those 13 questions to convince those agents that you should join the ranks of the Bureau side by side with them. It is a difficult interview, and you only get 2 opportunities in your life to go to it.
So are you saying that instead of asking, what would you do? It's more of a, what have you done?
That's it exactly.
Interesting. For people who find it difficult to talk about themselves, who believe that in promoting their successes is like bragging, what advice do you have for them?
That's actually one of the things that I always talk to my candidates about. So we have a session in Philadelphia. It's called the Phase 2 Reiteration. And all that we do is reiterate what they gleaned from the meet and greet and also what they were able to read on FBIjobs.gov. But we just put it in slightly different language. And that's one of the things that I'm always stressing to them is this isn't the time to be modest. This isn't about bragging about yourself. It's about letting these agents know who you are, all of the amazing qualities and traits that you're going to be bringing to the FBI. Because if you don't tell them in that hour, there's no other way for them to have that information. One of the things I really stress to candidates is to use the word I. The best way to prepare for phase 2 is to talk about yourself with someone else, whether that's a spouse, a friend, a parent, and tell them right at the beginning, keep track of how many times I use the word we. Make sure that I'm using the word I. That's a really good way for people to shift that mindset into thinking about, I accomplished this. Because even if you did it as part of a group, you were still part of that collaborative effort, and you have every right to use the word I. But that really does seem to help make people think about, yeah, I did this and it was something pretty amazing. And it gets them out of that discomfort of, oh gosh, I'm just talking about myself in such a braggy way. This is not the time to be modest during phase 2.
And this goes back to what you were telling us at the beginning when we talked about meeting the minimum requirements of being 23 and having a year of work experience. Yes, you qualified to apply, but when it gets to this interview, what are you going to be able to talk about?
Exactly. And I've had 26-year-old candidates that went through phase 2 successfully the first time and were fantastic. I've had people who are 35s that weren't able to get through successfully. So it's not just about the number of years you have on this planet. It's about what you've been doing in those years. Wealth of experience is an absolute requirement to successfully get through phase 2. It just usually coincides with age, but not always.
Very interesting. All right. So what's next?
So once you have gone through phase 2, then you officially enter the background portion of the process. One of the first things that we ask you to do is provide us the SF-86 form. And I want every person out there that's listening that wants to join the FBI someday to look up that form at opm.gov. SF is in standard form 86. The reason you want to look at that earlier than later is we're going to be asking you to account for your entire life, pretty much, on that form. That form becomes the basis of your background check. You're going to have to remember roommates that you had in college, a job that you held for 3 months when you were 23 years old, all of the information that the FBI will be verifying. Once you've provided us that form, then you sit down with an agent to have your personnel security interview that we call the PSI. That agent is going to go through that form line by line, make sure that you're comfortable with your responses, that you don't have any questions. They're going to probe a little bit. They're going to ensure that everything in that form is accurate to the best of your abilities, because the PSI and the SF-86 will then become the basis of your polygraph examination. And you obviously want to make sure that everything up to this stage that you've provided the FBI is accurate to the best of your knowledge. You're going to sit for that polygraph examination. You have to be honest. It is called a lie detector test for a reason. Once you have successfully passed that polygraph exam, you will have your medical examination, a drug test, and then you officially enter the background portion of the process. And this is where I tell candidates you really need to be patient, because this is being conducted by our security division. So I have a lot of candidates that will contact us in the field and say, what's going on? What's happening right now? I haven't heard from you in a while. And that's because it's not in our hands at that point. The security division is responsible for the background investigation. While they are doing that, however, you are also going to have your spouse, significant other, cohabitant, have a conversation with the applicant coordinator. This is in recognition of the fact that being a special agent doesn't just impact the person that holds that job, but it's a complete lifestyle change for the entire household, including very likely a move from your current location. We talk to new agent, trainee, and applicant spouses, fiancés, anyone that's going to be making that move with the candidate. I've even had candidates' children sit in on these conversations before, the older kids, so that they have a chance to ask any questions that they're curious about. But what we go over in that conversation is an agent's salary, the hours that you're expected to work, our weapons policy, the fact that there will be a weapon in the household, that you can't keep it locked in your vehicle overnight. And we also just talk about generally the lifestyle of an agent.
That's a lot. So let's unpack it a little bit. The polygraph. What are some of the reasons that people seem to be not passing the polygraph?
We've had a higher poly failure rate in the last couple of years than any of us have seen, at least in our memory. It's been pretty shocking. And the majority of those have been related to drug usage. So this is a good time for me to bring up the changes in the drug usage policy. The main one is marijuana usage. It has been for several years now, 3 years. You could not have used a marijuana product for the past 3 years. It has now gone all the way down to 1 year. There are so many states that have legalized marijuana that in recognition of that, the FBI has changed its policies. You do have to realize that we are a federal law enforcement agency, and we therefore go by federal guidelines, and marijuana is considered an illegal product at the federal level. So you cannot have used a marijuana product in the last year. We have, however, relaxed policies related to other hemp products, specifically any product that does not have THC in it. For a while, it was very difficult for us to get around candidates using hand cream that had CBD oil in it that they were able to get at the checkout lane at Target. Because of the way that CBD products were being regulated, it was very difficult for us to say there was not any THC, which is the element that produces the euphoric effects of marijuana. It was very difficult for us to say, well, that product guaranteed does not have any THC in it. Now we're looking at people that have used such products and asking them what the purposes were for those products. If the purpose was not to have that euphoric sense or to get high, then we approach that in a very different way. So that has relaxed as well. In terms of the other drug usage, it remains 10 years for drugs other than marijuana. And if you have used a prescription drug that was not prescribed to you, that's going to vary depending on the reason that you used it. For example, The number one illegally traded substance on college campuses today is Adderall. So Adderall and Ritalin. And the reason it's illegally traded is because a student doesn't have the prescription to use it. If they used that product for the purposes for which it's intended to remain focused, that's going to fall under a different parameter and a different guideline than if they used it, let's say, in conjunction with alcohol because they liked the way that it made them feel, or to stay up late to study for a test if they were using it for its stimulant purposes as opposed to for what it is generally prescribed for. So that is a new change. And I would say that drug usage is the number one reason that we see people fail out of the polygraph stage.
Yeah, I figured that. That's why I asked. And so again, you said this, and I just want to go over it one more time. Tell the truth. It's better for someone to say, hey, you've had a recent use of marijuana. You're going to have to apply later, as opposed to you failed the polygraph test. Your chances of becoming an agent are gone.
Yes. And this is actually another purpose of the meet and greet. We have this conversation at that stage. I provide my applicants the form that they will have to provide later on in the processing related to drug usage. And the only reason for me to give them that form at the meet and greet stage is to start that conversation, because I want to make sure that they are familiar with our policy and that they don't move forward at that point if they know they're not going to pass the polygraph examination. But I can tell you what happens after the background check, because at that point, we're in the home stretch. So following the background investigation, you take your last, let's hope, physical fitness test. This is taken within 120 days of your likely report date for your Quantico class. So this test, we are maintaining that minimum baseline score, but I really stress to my candidates in Philadelphia, and I know my fellow ACs are across the FBI, this is your last opportunity to get that passing score in the field before you go to Quantico. And at this point, they've had several months to prepare for the test. I don't see ever having an issue with having a candidate not getting the passing, which is a 12 with at least 1 point in each category at that last test. So you have your now completed background check. You have your successful passage of your PFT. And at that point, you're just waiting for that Quantico class. So you are in the final end game at that point.
And how long is this process?
We like to say that it's a year average, but lately it's been taking longer. It's been taking closer to 16 to 18 months. So depending on when you're listening to this podcast, that can change. It could go back to the year average, which is consistently what we've told people. And that's generally anecdotally what I've seen. But lately it has been taking a little longer, closer to 16 to 18 months on average.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the current transfer policy? What kind of firearms an agent would be required to carry and when? And of course, everybody wants to know about the salary. I mean, they are applying for a job. We know it's a career, but how much is an agent going to make at the beginning and make at the end? I've asked you a whole bunch of questions. Which one do you want to tackle first?
I think I will tackle the weapons policy first, because that's the fastest one. The reason that we want to have that conversation with significant others right off the bat is because we do have so many candidates that don't come from a law enforcement background. And for many, this will be the first time that a firearm will be kept in the home. And an agent is required to keep that weapon safely and securely in the home. The number one thing that our firearms unit will be drumming into every new agent trainee during those weeks at Quantico is firearms safety. And that includes ensuring that it remains a safe weapon while it's in the household. At this time, agents are using a 9mm as our standard weapon. That changed just in the last couple of years, where we had a mix of 40 as well as 9mm, and it has now gone to a standard 9mm. We also have some agents that will be issued long weapons. They might have a shotgun. We encourage all weapons to be placed into the household when an agent comes into the home at night, because we don't want anybody to lose their weapon because their vehicle is broken into. So we're very careful to ensure everybody in the household is aware of the fact that there will now be a weapon in the house and that is part of our policy. In terms of the mobility agreement, when someone looks at the Worldwide Mobility Agreement that all candidates are required to sign, it looks very scary because it looks like the FBI is going to be involuntarily moving them all over the country and possibly all over the world for the next 20 plus years. So I make sure that everyone in the family is aware of the policy as it stands, as well as the likely reality. So once you are in place at your first office, every move after that first placement, the majority of the costs associated with that are covered by the government. That means everything from a professional moving service coming out, boxing up your household goods, transporting it to your next location, to costs associated with a home closing. It's very expensive to move personnel around the FBI, which is why involuntary movement in the FBI does not happen as often as that Worldwide Mobility Agreement makes it look like. You are agreeing to it. However, the chances of you being able to remain in that first office, if you're happy being there, are extremely good. So this is something that I want to make sure everybody in the family is aware of, the policy as well as the reality of the situation.
That sounds like a change, because it used to be that you would go to a small or medium-sized office for 3 to 5 years, and then you would automatically be transferred to one of the top 12 large major divisions.
Yes. So they got rid of that policy. It was a very expensive policy. And I think that they found that there was enough voluntary movement throughout the FBI that they were able to get that movement in a more natural way.
All I can say is, wow. I think for me and for many retired agents, we've been telling that transfer scenario for so long. I've done a number of recruiting episodes and I wasn't aware that that was changed. So let's say somebody gets sent to Memphis, Tennessee, or Mobile, Alabama. They could stay there for their entire career and not have to be concerned about being transferred to LA or Chicago or Philadelphia or New York.
Very likely. So I've stressed to candidates, once they've signed that Worldwide Mobility Agreement, they are saying, yes, I agree to both voluntary and involuntary movement during my career. However, there is not a policy in place that forces agents to move out simply because they have been at a particular sized office for a certain period of time. I have recently been in touch with a lot of my Quantico classmates, as many of us approaching the time that we're going to be retiring, at least eligible to retire. And I would say about half of my Quantico classmates are still in their first field office. It's actually quite common.
And again, I got to say, wow, because that was something I was not aware of. So I apologize to all of the people out there that I have been giving wrong information to. But let's just say you are in Mobile or Memphis and you don't want to be. Now what?
So there are many different ways to move around the FBI, everything from taking a supervisory position at headquarters, which then naturally leads you into many opportunities at various field offices. Once you've spent some time at headquarters, then you are able to put in for a supervisor's desk at different field offices that have openings. Many people take advantage of that program. There are also voluntary rotational transfers. Some offices are more difficult to staff than others. We recently had one in the New York field office, for example. Sometimes there are specialty transfers for agents that have specialized skills, such as a technically trained agent. I've been in 3 field offices in my career. I started in Los Angeles. I would have been happy to remain in Southern California for my career, being from the LA area. But I met my husband, who was also a first office agent in Los Angeles, and he was from the Philadelphia area. So we took our second transfer to the Baltimore field office. He had a headquarters assignment that was a non-supervisory assignment. And that got us to the Baltimore field office and to the East Coast. And then after, I believe about 5 years in that assignment, he was able to get where he really wanted to be, which was the Philadelphia office.
Very interesting. Again, I've been giving out bad information for so long.
That's why it's so important to have these conversations with your recruiter, because the policies do change all the time. And I really stress to candidates, reach out to your recruiter, make sure that you have the most updated policy, because sometimes even FBIjobs.gov, particularly if it's something that's very recently changed, you might still get different information from your recruiter than what you're getting online. And you really want to stick with official resources. Please don't go out, read all of the wikis, all of the blogs that are providing various information, because you cannot post that information as an FBI employee, which means the people that are filling those blogs tend to be individuals that have gone through the process and have failed out of it, because that's actually a question that we will be going through in your polygraph examination. Have you been trying to get information, or have you been posting information via unofficial resources? That's one of the things that I stress to candidates at the meet and greet stage is please stick with official resources for processing.
Fascinating. Okay, so how would you, in saying that, how would you rate this podcast episode where I am talking to an official applicant coordinator? Do they get a pass in listening to this?
I recommend your podcasts all the time. I have candidates that come to me often not sure if they want to be an agent or if they want to be an analyst. And that podcast that we recorded before with Sierra has been an amazing resource for me, because often I can tell them, well, here's the link, go listen to the podcast, get some great information, and then come back to me with what you think you would like to do next. So I recommend your podcast all the time.
Thank you so much. And that episode that you're talking about was episode 202. And we talked about intelligence analyst positions and other non-agent jobs.
That's been a great resource for me.
The next big one is salary.
Yes. I tell people all the time, the majority of us take a pay cut when we first become an agent. And that's simply because the individuals that go into this role tend to have risen to a particular professional position. And usually their salary is commensurate with that. And then when you come in as a brand new agent, you start out at the base salary. Everybody begins as a GS-10. So if you're not familiar with the GS scale, I highly recommend a visit to opm.gov to get familiar with how GS works. But that's what all employees are going to be, is on the government scale. So everybody begins as a GS-10, and almost everybody begins as a GS-10 step 1. There are certain exceptions for people with prior government service, but for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to say GS-10 step 1. For each scale, there are 10 steps. As you start out, you are at that step 1. You have that as your base. And there are 3 elements that make up an agent's salary: the base, the locality percentage, and availability pay that we refer to as AVP. Locality percentage is going to vary based on the field office that you're assigned to. For example, if you are in New York, you're going to be making a much different locality percentage than if you are in Salt Lake City. While you are at Quantico as a new agent trainee, you will be making DC-based locality, which is pretty high. The third part of an agent's salary is that AVP. Agents, for the most part, do not make overtime. There are exceptions. It's typically going to be if there's a major event and we're able to get permission in advance from headquarters to authorize overtime. Here in Philadelphia, for example, when the Pope came to visit a couple of years ago, we had authorized overtime because so many agents were working around the clock. But typically, we make this AVP in exchange for working an average of a 50-hour work week and being available at all times, and I will explain that in a minute, you make an additional 25% of your base plus locality. So those are the three elements: the base, which is your GS, the locality percentage, and then your AVP. What I mean by being available at all times, that doesn't mean you can't have a real life. It doesn't mean you can't go on vacation. What it means is that you might be working some holidays, some weekends. You're not going to have the typical office hours kind of a schedule week in and week out. Yes. Do we often have more of an 8 to 6 type of a day? Absolutely. But there will definitely be times. This week, for example, I'm working several evenings. I worked this past weekend. That's very typical of an agent, and it's something that you have to be prepared for. But I really stress to people, the FBI is an incredibly family-friendly organization, and you shouldn't let that available at all time element be intimidating and make you think that you can't coach your kids' baseball team, go on vacation, and have an excellent work-family life balance. You absolutely can. And when I'm having those conversations with the spouses and significant others, that's something that I'm really stressing.
Let's go back to transfer. When I was asking you if you didn't want to be someplace, how could you get out? You mentioned headquarters. Do they still have the office of preference list too?
They do. So you do have an office of preference list. It allows an agent to specify what office they would most like to be in at some stage in their career. We don't see a lot of transfers via that list right now, but that could change in the future. Often things are very much budget dependent, and our budget really does also depend on what we're getting from Congress. Often it's not an internal decision. It's something that is set outside of the FBI, but that's absolutely another way that transfers can occur.
When we talk to Cassie about first assignments, we'll talk a little bit more about how that first assignment is determined. All right. So where are we now?
We are at Quantico at this point in terms of this fictitious Jane Doe, John Doe candidate. They are now setting foot onto the academy.
Well, we have a real live special agent who recently went through. So Cassie, you began your training at the FBI Academy in April of 2021. Is that correct?
Yes. I actually EOD'd, which is the entrance on duty for the agent position. 411 is my official 1 year.
I'd like for you to take us through what it's like, starting with just getting that letter with the class date on it.
Yeah, I mean, Serena's done a fantastic job of explaining the process. Patience is definitely something that I highly recommend for anybody who's going to be going through the process. When I got my letter, I had been in the process because of COVID and some delays for about 2.5 years. For me, it was, I still can't really put into words the email when I got that I was actually going to a training date. All that excitement, all of that to be said that Quantico is definitely an experience. You're there with a lot of other people that, have come to the Bureau for the right reasons. And it's few parts college of, you're kind of living in dorms with what will be some of your best friends, but you're also learning these very important skills and you're taking that first step into really becoming that job series that you're looking to go to. For me, we had a 2-week quarantine because we were during COVID times. So we had 2 weeks where we stayed in our rooms. We had, an hour of workout time in the morning and an hour in the afternoon where you're trying to get to know your classmates in that regard and go through some HR paperwork and onboarding and that kind of presentations. And then our training actually started 2 weeks after that. So I had kind of a unique experience on one of the last COVID classes, as we like to call them. That's when my training started. So mine was 20 weeks long, actually training for about 18. Serena, did they change that? Because we were there and they said they were going to go back to 16. Or are they keeping it at 18?
It's more like 17 plus a couple of days.
So my training was then, like I said, 18 weeks. Typically what they have is about 200 agent and IA trainees per class. And so my class was 2103, which is the fiscal year and then what iteration of that class. So it's mixed between IAs and agents. And then each class is broken into 4 sections, and they are Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. I was part of Charlie for 2103, and we had about, trying to do the math here, we had about 5 analysts, and then the rest were all agents up to about 50. So you're broken into these smaller sections just because it's a lot to manage that many people, and that's your class. You go to firearms together, you go to tactical training together, you sit in classrooms together, you do scenarios together, you write intelligence products with your IAs, you do different exercises as a team, because in the field you will be on these mixed teams. For me, I didn't have any law enforcement experience, so I was definitely nervous of going someplace where I was going to have to do defensive tactics and learn jujitsu and have a gun on my hip and kick a door down and learn how to clear a room to make sure it was safe for the rest of my team to enter. I'm sure plenty of your listeners out there are very worried about that. And for me, I was pleasantly surprised that those ended up being some of the favorite aspects of training down there. By far, those were the most fun venues to go to for me, because you're just learning something that's so completely outside of what you've done so far. And it's exciting. And again, you're with people that are there for the same reasons that you are, that want to learn just as much as you do. Those bonds and friendships you make down at Quantico, I still talk to a lot of people from my class just because we're all going through the same transitions together, and we all went through that experience together at Quantico. And apart from me kind of rambling around, that's the best way to describe it. You have to go there and you have to experience it to understand what it is. But it's definitely something that I hold dear as far as experience so far.
Would you say, though, that, I mean, you mentioned that you didn't have prior law enforcement experience, but you had worked for the FBI for almost 4 years before going to Quantico. Did you find that that made it easier for you, or do you feel that you had the same experience that somebody who came in from the teaching field or from sales or another law enforcement agency?
So that's a great question. I think it's very intimidating to come into the FBI at any stage. When I first came in, I came in as a staff operations specialist, or SOS. And I remember being so overwhelmed by just the acronyms, which I know that you both will probably, you're probably laughing right now of the acronym soup, that this new language you almost learn working in the government and then in the bureau specifically. So I do think that coming in as someone that had already had 4 years of experience, I knew the lingo, I knew the systems, the computers, I knew kind of the technology we're working with. So that definitely took a lot of stress off of me because I wasn't learning that outright. But I think there's pros and cons to having this other FBI experience. You expect it to be a certain way. And, positive or negative, sometimes that's different. Coming in from the outside, again, I can't imagine going back to 2017 and having to do that on top of learning all the law enforcement skills. So for me, I think it was good that I had that experience under my belt, because then I could wholly focus on this new skill set I couldn't have trained for on my own.
Well, I think a number of people are going to be very curious because they have no idea what a staff operations specialist is. So why don't we just take a little detour and explain that position?
Staff operations specialist, I like to describe them as close to an agent you can get without being an agent. I had a unique experience because I was a headquarters SOS, whereas a field SOS, you're kind of the right-hand person on a squad of individuals that is made up of analysts, SOSs, and agents. Typically, the SOS is supporting the agent work and helping them build tactical products, which would be, written subject targeting packages, helping them figure out information related to arrests and search warrants. They're doing database checks. They're kind of, like I said, that support for the agent to be able to then take that information and go interface with the public. So I kind of think of the SOS and the analysts as kind of, they're passing the baton to the agents who then go out and actually talk to the people. And again, that's probably just because for safety, the agents are trained in how to interact with people that might not be as thrilled to see you. So they're giving that foundation and that background. In my position where I was at headquarters, like I said, it was very different. I was more of an admin role. I worked in a few different offices and a few different assignments, just doing various different works that I got to see the bird's eye view of the entire FBI related to the program that I was working. And I got to kind of interface with different field offices in a regard of more, how do I help you guys do your job out in the field? So I got a very different viewpoint and experience, I think, that kind of shaped where I am now.
We're going to continue with this detour just for a second. And I'm going to ask Cerena, what's the difference between an SOS and an analyst, and how do you apply for those positions? Is that something that you would recommend somebody who's not quite ready to be an agent to try to get one of those positions to become an agent?
So the SOS position, it's exactly the way that Cassie described it. I tell people all the time, it's like being a tactical analyst. And it is probably the most common professional support position for someone to hold if they're already inside the bureau and then they're interested in becoming a special agent. So most SOSs are not hired externally. A lot of the SOS hiring is someone that's already inside the FBI in another position. They are interested in becoming an agent, and so they applied to be an SOS. That means it is a very highly sought after and super competitive position. For that reason alone, I don't necessarily recommend it for people to think, oh, all I have to do is get my foot in the door, then I'm going to become an SOS, and then I'm going to become a special agent, simply because there are a limited number of those SOS opportunities versus coming in from outside of the FBI, where there's an unlimited number of options for professional experience that you can qualify with. I do think it's an excellent way to transition into being an agent. It's just in sheer numbers, not something that I would tell people, oh, just go to point A, go to point B, and eventually you're going to be an agent. The intelligence analyst position is very different in terms of hiring, because a lot of the IAs that we hire, it is an external hire. And that position, a lot of times we do have people that go from being an IA to being an agent, but I would say not nearly as many as we have transitioning from SOS to agent. So the intelligence analyst position, you're looking more from the bird's eye perspective. You're looking at information that's coming in from other field offices, from other intelligence community members, and you're trying to create intelligence products that's going to assist in a broader way at the field level. I'd say most IAs, actually I know this, most IAs are at our headquarters. We do have several in the field, but the majority are at headquarters, specifically because a good part of their job is getting information from this broader variety of resources. Then that intelligence product that they provide, individual field offices and agents are able to take that and see if it will assist them in their cases. Versus the SOS position, it is definitely more targeted toward the cases that are being worked at that point in time on that squad.
Thank you.
Can I make a quick point too? So for recruitment, I tell people when they ask me about what they should apply to, and I say, obviously work with your recruiter in your local office, but if you have even the slightest pull towards being an agent or being an analyst, go for what you want. And at the end, I don't always say go be an IA first and then be an agent. I say, if you want to be an agent, apply for the agent job. There's no reason that you have to go a different route, like Cerena said, just to get your foot in the door. I just tell people, if you know you want to be an agent, apply for that, because that shows that you know you want it and you're going to go work for it.
And Cassie, that makes me very happy that that's the advice you give, because I think people that are coming in from a different private sector mindset, especially with organizations that you intern at that company and then you hope to get a job offer, and then that job offer eventually leads you from the mailroom to being partner at the company someday. That's not necessarily the way that the FBI is structured. So do we have people that come in at an entry-level position, work their way eventually into the job that they hope to have, whether it's an analyst position or an agent position? Absolutely. But the steps to get to that end goal are just so much more limited than if you were to do exactly what Cassie said, which is gain that experience outside of the FBI and come in that way.
Excellent detour. We've answered a lot of questions that people may have had. Let's go back to Quantico. Could you give us some examples of the backgrounds of some of the people that were in your class?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I had We have these different sections from each section then, which this is the bureau and their chain of command. Each section then is broken into different squads. So every section, again, mine was Charlie for C. A leader is chosen. That becomes your class leader. And then 4 squad leaders are chosen. And I was chosen as a squad leader. I don't know if that was just because of my previous experience or what it is, but your supervisor decides who they'd like to be squad leader. And on my squad alone, I had someone that came from Army Ranger Battalion, obviously very, military experience, very versed in law enforcement type aspects. I had a former cop who was also a firefighter. I had a sheriff's county officer. And then I also had someone who had been in, I'm going to butcher this and he's going to make fun of me, but he was a trader. So he did like Wall Street trades and that kind of financial, basically a Wall Street trader. And then I also had someone who worked in IT for different medical organizations. And I had someone that had more of an accounting degree. So you run the gamut at that point. And then myself, before I joined the bureau, I was a recruiter, I was a substitute teacher, I was an executive assistant. None of those things scream law enforcement agent, anything like that. But that was just on my squad of about 10 people. So you can see the range there. Yes, we had the more military law enforcement firefighter, but we also had moms and we also had teachers and we had people that were accountants and people in IT. I always say that it's the skill set that you bring, not necessarily the title or the type of experience that you bring. It's the personality and that mindset, I think, that makes an agent.
So what's a typical day like at the FBI Academy?
There really isn't a typical day, but I'm trying to think of just, a slice of time. So typically you'd wake up, you'd grab breakfast in the cafeteria. We all usually sat together as a class. And then from there, you may have in blocks, depending on the day, you might have a 4-hour block of firearms, which means then you're out on the range for 4 hours, shooting any number of rounds, learning different drills, learning different weapon handling. And then you'd go to lunch. You'd have about an hour for lunch. And then maybe in the afternoon, you'd have 2 hours of defensive tactics where you're learning jiu-jitsu and body mechanics and learning how to protect your weapon and also protect yourself in different situations. You're learning how to arrest individuals. And then from there, you'd go for another 2 hours where you'd be learning our case management system. So you'd be more of in a classroom setting, or you'd be learning interview and interrogation. So you're learning how to talk to people and then also learning how to get certain pieces of information from them in a maneuvering way. So yeah, again, it depends on your day, depends on your schedule, but that's typically the different kind of topics you may be looking at in any given day.
And for you, had you had any experience handling firearms before you went to the academy?
I did, but it was friends of mine had taken me out to shoot back when I first graduated from college, which at this point is about 10 years ago. Once I decided that the agent job was something I wanted, I actually stopped shooting because I wanted any bad habits that I may have had previously. I wanted to make sure that I learned the way the FBI wanted to teach me. And so I stopped shooting for a while, which, if you have experience, it's great. I actually think some people may be surprised by this, but the FBI, teaches their firearms a very specific way. And I did see some people who had lots of firearms experience struggle a little bit with the way the FBI wants to teach it. Actually, almost not having firearms experience, for those of your listeners that are probably worried about, I've never shot a gun, that's actually okay. They will teach you. There's so many hours of you standing on the range with some of the best instructors I've ever worked with in any capacity that have the most patience I've ever seen, walking people how to use the weapon, maneuver the weapon, break the weapon down, nuts to bolts. This is your new best friend. And I really appreciated that instruction.
Did you find it difficult? Were there other people in your class who found it difficult to go through the firearms training?
Firearms for me was very much a head game. There was days you'd have good days and days you wouldn't. And just depending on kind of what you have going on in and outside of training, it fluctuates. But definitely firearms was always fun, especially towards the end of training when you're doing more shooting steel and shooting the long gun, which is our M4. Those days were definitely very, very fun, despite the fact that I was there in July, which it was terribly hot, and you're standing in the sun for 4 hours. You're there with, again, some of your best friends. So even if you're not having the greatest time, your friends are around you and they're making it more fun for you.
Were there any people in your class that had issues? Because I think, again, just trying to ease the fears of people who are considering the position, but are just not quite sure about handling firearms.
There was definitely people that had trouble. It's not an intuitive skill set, and it's something that takes a lot of confidence and continued confidence to really grasp the different things they're teaching. But, someone on my squad, he had never fired a gun before, ever. Watching him press the trigger for the first time and seeing his face afterwards, for me, was just really exciting because he was scared of having a gun, that requirement. And he ended up being one of our better guys on the line. Again, because I think he had that confidence and he built that up over the 18 weeks that you're there. It's really hard not to walk away feeling like you can handle a gun. And obviously they wouldn't let you leave if you couldn't. For me, and again, watching other people that may have struggled who had never fired a gun, it was fun to watch their progression over the 18 weeks of learning how to use this tool, basically.
All right, why don't we go to the physical fitness? So you've taken the PFT out of the field. And so you've already been able to certify before you step on to the academy that you can at least meet the minimum requirements and pass the PFT successfully. So is that as big a deal as it was in the past when you were worried about whether or not you were going to pass that test?
Definitely there's a focus on physical fitness there. And you take the PFT, if I remember correctly. Again, my beginning is a little skewed because of the 2-week quarantine, but I believe in the first or second week, you take your PFT that you're there. So your first week is typically, like I said, HR presentations, your onboarding, you're learning benefits and all of the behind the scenes that kind of get you onboarded into the bureau. And then I believe it's the first week of training that you take your first PFT. And that's really your first test. And the standards, again, very high standards for meeting those requirements. I came in, I believe I had gotten like a 16 or 17 on my pre-Quantico when I came in. And, I maintained that on my first PFT, which was fantastic for me. There were some people that failed the PFT, the first one, and that doesn't knock you out of training, but it definitely adds a level of stress that I would highly recommend. It's the tests that you know the answers to going into the academy. So definitely know that you can pass that test regardless of stress, regardless of you didn't sleep well the night before. You need to have that test in the bag when you get there because it's the least of your worries. And you want to make sure you walk in there, you pass it because it's only going to give you that step of confidence going through the rest of training. So yeah, I believe it's the first week you take it and then you don't take it again until I want to say like week 16 or so, maybe more like halfway through that they have you take it again. And obviously, they want you to improve your score at that point because you have been training physically and in different aspects along the way. And then for those that may have failed their first PFT, that's their chance to pass the second one. And then I believe there is a third option. And Cerena, you might have to correct me on that, but I know there was a third option to take it. I don't know if they changed that policy either.
There is a third option, but it's not going to be offered to everybody.
Got it. Correct. So there's 3 options to take it. But again, I tell anybody that's on their way to the academy, pass it the first time. And it's one thing you can check off your list. And then you just maintain your fitness and improve your fitness, obviously, just by virtue of being there, because it's just, it's one less stressor.
I have to go back to what you just said, Cerena. So it's not an option offered to everyone. I take it that you mean maybe somebody had been sick or injured, right? So they're offered a third opportunity.
Yes. And I'm so happy to hear everything that Cassie said about the PFT because it is verbatim what I'm constantly stressing to candidates, which is we have given you the answers to this test. Why would you be studying a biology exam book for a trigonometry test? You have to be taking the test on a regular basis. And at the end of the day, if you show up and you don't have the answers to a test that we've already given you the answers to, that brings a lot of things into question about how much you want this job. And you do not want to have your livelihood on the line because you can't do push-ups. At this stage, while you're a Quantico, you've quit your other job. So you are taking a test just to keep your job. Cassie, I'm sure you would agree with this. You have plenty of other things on your plate. You are very busy. The last thing that you need is to have more mandatory PT in the morning and to be stressed about the fact that you now have a target on your back. going into Quantico, having that passing score is incredibly important.
Yeah, I second everything that Serena just said. I mean, that there's enough stress at Quantico. There's enough change that you're going through. There's enough mental strain that you're trying to work in. You don't need to have that hanging over you, because it's many weeks down the road that then you get to take your second chance, and this thing is just hanging over you the whole time. And I can't imagine having that added stress. Quantico is stressful enough than to have this thing in the back of your mind of, am I going to get to keep my job? That's something I wouldn't wish on anyone.
Now, we've talked about firearms training. We've talked about the physical fitness aspect. Let's talk a little bit more about the academic part of it. I recall when I went through, again, many, many, many years ago, I could use the word decades ago, you had to pass. Of course, you took tests for all of the academic area, and you were only allowed to fail 2 times. After that, you were going to be asked to leave the academy. Is that still the case?
Yes, it is. So you have a slew of academic tests. The majority of them are legal based. There's 3 legal tests that you have to take throughout your time there. There's various other writing assessments and quizzes and just general tests for knowledge. There's interview and interrogation tests, different kind of benchmarks that you need to reach, but definitely the tests that can get you dismissed are the legal tests. And like I said, there's 3 spread out over the course of your time there. Say, for example, you go into Legal 1 and you fail that, and I believe you need an 80 or above to pass. Say you fail Legal 1, what they do is a kind of after hours study session with the people that may not have passed that test to make sure that they're understanding the concepts that they may have missed. And then they're afforded another opportunity to take the test again. Should they fail that test the second time, they will be automatically dismissed from the academy. Now, for example, say you fail Legal 1, but you pass the retest, but then fail Legal 2. Again, that's still 2 that you failed in that category, and you would be asked to be dismissed. They're high stakes tests. I know, at least for my section, Charlie, we did everything together. We decided early on that we were going to get through this stuff together. And so we had these massive study sessions. We'd be walking up and down the halls in the dorm, shouting different legal verbiage and things at each other, reciting different things we needed to memorize, trying to talk about these concepts over breakfast. So it becomes this team effort that everyone takes the test together, passes together. And if you didn't pass, then we rally behind you to get you through the test. People may be stressed out about the classroom aspect of that, but definitely, lean on your teammates for those types of things as well. For me, a lot of the concepts, I didn't learn them and internalize them until I talked about them with someone else. Having those conversations really embedded those ideas into your brain that you go into the test knowing you're going to be fine.
Serena, I want to go back to you because we've been talking about updates and things that have changed. Has there been any changes to the curriculum now that the training timeframe has gone from 20 weeks to 18 weeks and now to 17 and some change?
Yes, there has been. So I had the opportunity to talk to somebody in the training unit that actually oversees the diversity and inclusion portion of training at Quantico. And we had a wonderful conversation about the changes that they've made. And I had reached out to her specifically to ask, was anything dropped? Has anything massively shifted? Because the time span has been compressed somewhat. And what she told me is just making me very excited about the direction that the training is going in. They reached out to the field offices. They talked to newly graduated agents, and they talked to those agents' supervisors. And they asked, how well prepared were your new agents? And new agents, how well prepared were you the day that you set foot into your first office? Where did you feel there were gaps in training? What should we be focused on more? What changes would you recommend? And they took that real world evidence and they revamped the curriculum. So now it's more reflective of what you would actually be doing from day one as a brand new agent. So it's a little more parallel to basic field office work. And they have, I think, more effectively integrated the intelligence analysts and the staff operations specialists that are going through the classes with the agents so that they're working together in a way that's more logical and a way that is more reflective of how they would be partnering once they get to the field office. So all of the changes that they've made, I think, are just really exciting.
Did they get rid of anything in order to compress that time?
She said no, that it was just a shifting around of the way that they had done things before so that it was more logical. She used the word logical a lot. And I think that what she meant by that is that it is better reflective of what they'll be experiencing once they report to that first office.
Beautiful. And let's just talk now about just the atmosphere. What was it like just to walk down the halls? I guess in some people's mind, they're thinking about basic training or, West Point, and they're saluting their superiors as they walk down the hall and they're at rest or they have to stand in formation. Tell them what the atmosphere is actually like at the FBI Academy.
I love this question because, again, I had a hard time putting it into words. But for me, I had been at the academy before when I was training as an SOS. So I had this idea of what it was going to be like. And it was so much more fun. Again, you could think you're with people that are there for the right reasons. No one joins the Bureau just on a whim. They're there because they want to be there, and they're there because they want to do good work. And that's an infectious environment to be around. There's also times when it's not great. You're having a rough day, you're very stressed out about a test, or you're not feeling great because defensive tactics really kicked you hard and you're trying to recover from that. And that environment, I think, is something that you can't really put into words. I like to think of it as almost like college, because the dorms are very much like college, where everyone's kind of hanging out together and talking about their day and getting to know each other that way. But then also it's very serious because, these are life or death situations you're training for. Your job is very much an adult professional job. You're taking on a very big responsibility. The FBI's mission is huge. So you kind of have this weird dynamic of everybody's buddy. You're not competing with each other because there's a place for everyone. If you've made it to the academy, you have a place. So it's not like you're trying to cutthroat, get rid of people in your class and that kind of environment. It's definitely not that. It's very much a team atmosphere. This is your crew and you're going to get through it together. It is like college. You're in a dorm environment. For my class, like I said, we were the tail end of COVID. So we actually had roommates. So you will be living in a very small room with a roommate. And then it's suite style. So you'll have a shared bathroom typically between 4 people. So, you have all the pain, I guess, of trying to, sync shower schedules and sleep schedules and, all of that. For me, that felt very much like college. But then, like I said, you put on your uniform, put a gun on your hip, and you go out and you do a really cool job.
All right. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that first assignment. We spent a lot of time talking to Cerena about the transfer policy. I've heard they used to joke that the process of deciding where they were going to transfer a new agent involved a blind monkey on a dartboard. So it sounds like things have changed a lot. Cerena, why don't you talk to us about that first selection? And then Cassie, if you could talk to us about what it's like when you first find out how the academy goes through the process of letting you know what your assignment is.
Jerry, apparently your agent generation informed my agent generation, which might still be informing Cassie's, because that blind monkey became a blind drunk monkey when I was going through.
It's still there. I didn't know if we were going to say it on here, but no, it's still there.
And sometimes some of the choices you really do just scratch your head. You rank those 56 field offices in order of preference from 1 through 56. And then that is taken into consideration by the transfer unit. The transfer unit is getting input from all of the field offices. They're looking at their funded staffing level, their FSL, and they're looking to see where they have critical gaps that match up with the requests of the new agent trainees. It has improved tremendously in the last several years in terms of averages. So right now, there's about a third of the new agent trainees are averaging their number 1 choice. The other 2/3 are averaging in their top 5. However, New York, LA, San Francisco are as close as you're going to get to a guarantee if you rank that office as number one. It's not a guarantee, but it's as close as you're going to get. So that also helps to skew the numbers a little bit. I do take an informal poll every time we have a new agent that reports to Philadelphia. And I have consistently seen that the average is somewhere around top 5, top 6. But you're still going to have people that will get number 24, people that will get number 14. So they are improving. But I do stress to all of my candidates, even though this is the average, you might be getting a little further out of that than you would hope. Your chances of getting a particular region are very good if you rank those top offices, your top 10, your top dozen by region. The main problem is when people bounce all over the country and the transfer unit looks at that and they think they don't really care where they end up. They just want one of these particular offices. At the end of the day, it all comes down to needs of the Bureau.
And we'll hear that saying over and over again during our FBI careers. It's based on the needs of the Bureau. Cassie, when did you provide that list of the offices where you wanted to be transferred to? And where was Philadelphia ranked?
You provide that list via an internal system, and you have to rank every office. So if someone thinks they're going to, leave a certain office off the list, they'll get you. You do have to rank 1 through 56. I believe it's the first or second weekend that you're there. They do a whole presentation on the same stuff that Cerena just touched on. What offices are the largest, your quote unquote guarantee offices, if you put those number one. They talk through different scenarios that might happen, the resources, all of that. And then you rank your list, you submit it, and then you go about your life for a few weeks because that list is gone. It's in the system and it's up to the FBI gods at that point as to where you will be. I believe on week 6 or so, for me, I'll never forget, it was May 19th. They have this grand celebration known as Orders Night, which I'm sure the two of you fondly remember, where you get up in front of your class, they hand you an envelope, and you proudly say where you processed from. So what office you came from, where you hope to go, so you're number one, and then where you think you're going to go. And then you open your envelope, you read it aloud, and there is always a photographer there to catch your reaction. For me, I was very fortunate. I got my second choice, which is Philadelphia. I couldn't tell you, the mindset exactly behind all of it, but I got up there and I said, I processed out of Washington field office. I want to go to Cincinnati, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to go to New York because I put it just high enough on the list that I think I'm going to New York. And I opened it and said Philly. And I'm pretty sure I did like a punch in the air because I got to stay East Coast. I have family in Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia really is where I wanted to be, just based on its size and kind of, like I said, that I got to stay East Coast.
Well, of course, I have to ask you, why Cincinnati?
It's a long story. So in my previous work at the FBI, I had worked very closely with a squad out there that worked domestic terrorism, became really good friends with the squad out there, and they lobbied hard to get me to put that as number one because they wanted to continue working with me, which I was very appreciative of that. And also I had the mindset of, I'm from California. I've lived on the West Coast. I've now lived on the East Coast in DC. Why not try the middle of the country? But again, like I said, Philly, I am not upset about being in Philly at all either. So it all works out.
Were there people who opened up their envelopes and the camera caught them not looking very happy?
Absolutely. There was definitely, I'll never forget, one of my good friends. He opened his envelope and got Sacramento, which is my hometown. So I was very excited for him. He was a little dumbfounded because he thought he had put so many other offices that were bigger that he was convinced he was going to these other offices. And then to get Sacramento, he was in shock. But it ended up that because I'm from Sacramento, I was able to give him lots of help and advice. And it's turned out to be a really good thing for him. But definitely there are people that open that envelope, they read it, and their reaction is definitely something you never forget. And a lot of us went and hugged them after. And again, because we're a team, throughout the rest of training, you're there with them and you're kind of helping them come to terms with this is what's going to happen and we're all going to get through it together.
Actually, Sacramento was my first office. I came in through Norfolk, Virginia, and my very first office was beautiful Sacramento, California. So that was,
Were you in headquarters city then?
yeah. Actually, when I first got my orders, it said Fresno.
Oh, no.
I know. And
Oh, no.
yeah, definitely. That was a big shock. But by the time I got ready to leave, they had changed it back to headquarters city. So I was right there in Sacramento. But this was back in the old policy. So I was only there for a year and a half, then getting another transfer letter that said Philadelphia. So I'm kind of glad they stopped doing that because you never really got to get settled as a new agent. You didn't really get to work cases to their conclusion because you were being moved around so much. And so it's nice to hear that initial assignment could be your only assignment if that's the way you want it to play out. So Cerena, you said you were from LA and that was your first office. So was that something that you put down on your list and you got what you wanted?
Oh, absolutely. I was so happy to get to go back home. And it's funny because 5 of us put in for the Los Angeles field office, and LA has always been difficult to staff, just like New York, San Francisco, because they're very high cost of living areas. They didn't have that almost guarantee mindset when I went through, but everybody that put in for LA assumed they would be getting it. 3 of us did. 1 of the 5 got San Diego and the other one got San Francisco. So we did all get California, but 2 got places they didn't expect. And when the person that got San Diego looked a little crestfallen, I think I might have punched him. You really can't complain about going to San Diego versus Los Angeles.
No, you cannot.
No, definitely not. San Diego is one of the most beautiful places. I probably would have the same reaction, Cerena.
So, Cerena, I've asked you this question before, but I want to ask you again. And Cassie, why and when you joined the FBI?
I was one of those people, and this is more than half of my candidates, that had wanted to be an FBI agent since childhood. Both of my parents taught art. When I left for Quantico, they gave me a little stuffed black sheep that still sits on my computer monitor to this day because they have no idea what prompted it or really where I came from. I had an excellent recruiter while I was in college. He would always take my phone calls, even after he was no longer the recruiter. And he made the process seem like it was achievable, which is so important to someone that's embarking on this because the popular media portrayals make it seem like only superheroes can have this job. I will tell you now, as the recruiter coming full circle after 20 years, it is absolutely something that people should be looking into that might have a little voice that says, no, you can't. I'm here to tell you, yes, you can.
Cassie, what about you? Why did you join the FBI?
My story is a little longer, but I am about to be 33. So if you do the math, I was about 12 on September 11th. So I'm sure my story is not going to be unique for many of your listeners. But, 12-year-old, do you really know what you want to do when you grow up? I remember, and I will never forget, sitting in my kitchen in California, 3,000 miles away from where everything was happening, eating a bowl of Cheerios, getting ready for school, watching a TV that was on a Lazy Susan that had rabbit ears. For those of you that don't know what rabbit ears are, it's when a TV had to have an antenna still inside your house. So go back in time, very small TV, very small screen. The towers had already been hit at that point because we're 3 hours behind. And I remember eating my Cheerios and watching the towers collapse. And the feeling I got in the pit of my stomach, that feeling convinced me on that day, whether I knew it at the time or not, that the world needed helpers and I wanted to be a helper. From 3,000 miles away, obviously, I couldn't do much as a 12-year-old, but I decided then that I would be the helper for the next time something happened. Hopefully it never did. But as we know through history, I have been at the Bureau and watched things happen, such as Parkland, the Vegas shooting. Most recently, I was in DC on January 6th when I watched all of that happen. And the same gut feeling of be the helper has driven me to do this job and to do it the best way that I can. The FBI, we've talked about it kind of between the 3 of us, but it carries with it this reputation. It also carries with it some fear for people because the FBI is talking to you. It's probably not a good day. And so I've always told myself that you're probably talking to someone on their worst day. Be something that's positive that they can walk away and say, that was the worst day ever, but that FBI agent made it better. So I really just want to challenge people. If you're thinking of doing this job, think about that. Think about being the helper. Think about being the positive light in someone's life, even though it might be the worst day they've ever had.
And I do have to say that a lot of my candidates, that January 6th is the reason that they applied. And I have a lot of candidates that say they were, this makes me feel old, but they were around your age, Cassie, when 9/11 occurred, and that it was an inspirational moment.
So I'd like to give my guest the last word. Cerena, if you could go first, and then we will hear from Cassie. What would you like to say?
I've been in this position of being a recruiter for around 3 years now. And if someone would have told me at the beginning of my career that I would find it as rewarding as any other aspect of what I've done, I would have said, absolutely not. I'm just here to put on handcuffs and break down doors. But being the recruiter has been such a marvelous experience because I am helping to shape the future of the FBI, which means to some extent helping to shape the future of this nation. And I strongly encourage everyone, please reach out to your local recruiter, start that conversation early. But before you do that, spend a little bit of time, do the research, go to FBIjobs.gov, learn everything that you can about the role on that site, and then come up with the questions that you want to have that's related just to your situation. And you'll find that you could have someone that really has a major impact in your life.
For me, definitely, if you have the inkling, if you feel like something's pulling you towards this career for this job, which we call it that, but we all know it's more than that, explore it. Talk to your friends about it. Talk to your family about it. Don't hide that desire and making it think you're going to be the weird one. We need the weird ones. Absolutely. Listen to the people around you. I don't think I would be here without the support of my family telling me that I could, specifically my grandfather, just saying, this is you, go do it. There isn't a day that goes by that I'm not immensely thankful for what I've gotten to do so far. And I mean, I've got 19 years left, plus, hopefully. So I'm excited to see where things kind of take me.
And that's the end of the interview. There's a link for the show notes for this interview in your podcast app's description of the episode. In the show notes, you'll find photos of Special Agents Cerena Coughlin and Cassie Winkel, including candid shots taken while they were attending the FBI Academy. There are links for FBIjobs.gov and the FBI's core competencies, as well as diversity stats and audio timestamps for all of the topics covered during the episode. You'll also find a link to other FBI retired case file review recruitment-focused episodes. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.